A U.S.-led military coalition that includes Arab partners struck ISIS targets in Syria from the air again today. A Pentagon spokesman said the operations are ongoing. Earlier, the Pentagon said it's investigating whether U.S.-led airstrikes in Syria on Tuesday killed a leader of the al-Qaeda-linked Khorasan group. U.S. officials describe Mohsen al-Fadli as a dangerous operative, one of the few who knew beforehand about the 9/11 attacks. Officials report that airstrikes on the Khorasan group were substantial. Targets included the organization's training camps, a bomb factory, and command and control facilities. Very little information about the shadowy organization has been made public, but U.S. officials have reportedly known about the Khorasan group for at least 2 years. William Braniff is the executive director at START, a national consortium for the study of terrorism and response to terrorism, and he joins us via Skype from Washington, D.C. Bill, thank you for coming on. I do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, I think most Americans heard about the so-called Khorasan group, as I understand it, which is a name coined by the United States. They just heard about it a few days ago when President Obama announced the airstrikes in Syria. So just start with us, if you will, with a description of who and or what is this Khorasan group?
Well, the group itself is a subset of al-Qaeda core, the card-carrying members of the al-Qaeda organization that have inserted themselves in the midst of the Syrian conflict, and were attempting to use individuals coming into that conflict and the safe haven provided by a contested terrain in order to conduct attacks against targets in the West, Europe, and the United States. And the name Al-Khorasan is a reference to the area that straddles the Afghanistan and Pakistan border, where Al-Qaeda has had safe haven dating back to the 1980s.
And how closely are they linked with the mission activities and leadership of Al-Qaeda?
I certainly don't have access to the kind of intelligence that would suggest what their day-to-day connectivity, week-to-week connectivity is, but these are described in the open sources as part of the old guard, the original sort of founding cadre of al-Qaeda. So individuals that, such as al-Fadli, that had links to bin Laden directly, and have been involved in various of al-Qaeda's exploits. Al-Fadli is alleged to have supported the al-Qaeda franchise in Iraq in the mid-2000s, for example, and has operated from Iran following the September 11th attacks and our counterattack into Afghanistan. So these are well-traveled individuals who have been engaged in al-Qaeda's affiliated operations around various regions in the world.
Bill, can you unpack for us then how the Khorasan group in its mission differs from the al-Qaeda as it exists, which differs from ISIS, which differs from the al-Qaeda-associated al-Nusra Front?
Sure. I actually don't think that Khorasan is really anything different from what we see play out in other places in other regions. Al-Qaeda's modus operandi is to insert itself into other people's conflicts, use that conflict as a kind of safe haven where they can capture men, materiel, and finances coming into that region, and then they try to reorient some of that energy against their preferred target set. So in this case, the United States and Western governments. We've seen this happen in East Africa. There was an East African al-Qaeda cell that worked for years within the context of al-Shabaab, but not as a part of al-Shabaab, in order to reorient the violence coming out of East Africa. Similarly, we've seen Americans who went to go fight for the Afghan Taliban be reoriented and sent home to try to target the United States. I'm referring to Najib al-Azazi. So this is a very common occurrence for al-Qaeda to insert itself into other conflicts and then reorient some of the violence back at the West. It's very different from what the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria is doing, which is actually conducting an insurgency on the ground against Assad and sectarian violence against really any Muslim or non-Muslim community that doesn't see the world the way they see it. Currently, their primary target is not the far enemy. They're concentrating on capturing control of what they're calling the caliphate and building those institutions.
So tell us a little bit more about this purported leader, Mohsen al-Fadli. We don't know whether or not the airstrikes that have been conducted have killed this leader, but what do you know about him?
There very little, to be honest. He's not someone who's had a high profile. He's a Kuwaiti. He's in his mid-30s and was an associate of Bin Laden. In the news articles that I've read today, it appears he was one of the individuals who had foreknowledge of the 9/11 attacks. That is, if that's true, that's very surprising. It was a very limited number of individuals that would have had that knowledge and would have suggested a very close relationship. And perhaps this is one of the sort of aces up al-Qaeda's sleeve in terms of trying to maintain a low profile for operational security reasons. One thing we understand about al-Qaeda, I mentioned the case of Najib al-Azazi. The United States was actually able to kill 2 of the cell leaders that were orchestrating Najib al-Azazi's attempted attack in New York City. And yet they still maintain that attack, right? Even though after 2 had been killed, a 3rd one stood up to take the place of the other 2. And so when we say al-Qaeda has a deep bench, this is sort of what we were referring to. They have individuals who are willing to have kept a low profile who can step up when operational leaders are killed. But eventually, you could argue that well will run dry as new recruits gravitate towards groups other than al-Qaeda core.
Well, based on the point that you're making there, then do you, in your opinion, and your educated opinion at that, think that just these airstrikes will be sufficient and enough to, as the United States has said, degrade this terrorist threat?
Well, in terms of U.S. military doctrine, yes. Degrading an enemy does not require their destruction or their neutralization. So yes, airstrikes will degrade the capabilities of the Islamic State, of Khorasan, but it will not defeat or destroy those organizations. There's a few things that could happen, right? Limited airstrikes, while degrading the kinetic capabilities of those groups, may actually bolster their claims to legitimacy because they can withstand them. If you're fighting a total war and your enemy is attacking you in a limited fashion, right, you're likely going to be able to withstand that assault, that limited assault. However, that doesn't mean we shouldn't conduct these degrading kinds of attacks and mitigate threat where we can, but it's not a sufficient condition for the ultimate defeat of the Islamic State. That will require a solution in real terms on the ground, replacing any void that is left when a group like the Islamic State is just degraded sufficiently.
And as the President of the United States has said, it will take time. We'll have to leave it right there for now. William Braniff. Bill, thank you so much.
Thank you.